Good Tuesday morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. We got some Seahawks stuff to dig into, and unfortunately, once again, it's not the kind of stuff that I was hoping I would be able to dig into. We are still dealing with the small potatoes because the big potatoes they're not appearing. They're not happening. There's nothing to talk about in terms of big picture items right now. It's all just the little things that every team does at the end of the season. Obviously, I know that a lot of people have the ongoing nothing burger in terms of big picture changes with the Seahawks on their minds. There are definitely going to be some videos where I go into that, but I want to give it a few days. The last thing I want to do is make a video where I criticize and complain about how we're not going to hold anyone accountable, and then a few hours later I learned that something big happened and we did hold someone accountable. So I am going to give it a few days, but trust me, it's on my mind. It's the main thing on my mind with this team right now. And if you look at the way things are going right now, believe me, I notice. I know. It doesn't look like we're going to really change anything big. On the coaching and front office side, I don't see, at this point, I think the best we can hope for is that we get rid of Norton. And that might not even matter. That might not even matter because whoever you bring in to replace Norton's just going to be another Carroll yes man. But I don't see any reason to believe that Carroll getting canned is even on the table. I don't see any reason to believe that John Schneider is even remotely on the hot seat. I'm just not seeing it. In a couple of weeks, we're probably going to be at the point where my best case scenario is we get rid of Clint Hurts and the Ivan the Terrible, and that sucks. And on the player side, we're not going to know for a few months. We're not going to know about Wilson until after the draft. We're not going to know about guys like Wagner and Carson until mid-June, really. But it just doesn't feel like the monumental wholesale change is going to happen, and it infuriates me, no doubt. And I will talk about it in the coming days. And like my God, if you haven't watched Pete Carroll's press conference from Monday, I recommend you go watch it. He just babbles on and on in this weird like at one point he starts talking about Daryl Taylor as like a guy who he gave a second chance, which no, he didn't. He gave him a first chance. I seriously kind of suspect that he said Daryl Taylor but meant to say Robert Kemdichi. Like, I don't know what to say about that, but I hate it. But it's what it is. So I wanted to take a video to talk about some futures contracts that the Seahawks gave out yesterday, and I want to talk about what future contracts are because obviously some people might not be very familiar with how futures contracts work. So before I go over these names, let's take a look at this old Bleacher Report article on what a futures contract is. It is the same as a regular active roster contract with the regular rules in terms of salary and cap charges, etc. The only difference is that it doesn't take effect until the start of the next league year, so sometime a little bit after the Super Bowl. Teams can sign players to futures contracts as soon as the previous regular season is over, but the contract won't count against the salary cap or 53-man limit. Instead, it'll count against the salary cap and 90-man camp limit of the following season. In the meantime, the player goes on the futures list and can't be signed by any other team. Any player who wasn't on an active roster at the end of the outgoing regular season is eligible to sign a futures contract. So it's basically a way to preserve your practice squad guys. If you have some guys on your practice squad that you really like and you don't want them to be eligible to be picked up by another team, you give them a futures contract, which is basically a minimum contract with no guarantees or very few guarantees, and nobody else can sign them. And if you end up getting to the training camp or preseason or whatever, and you're like, I changed my mind, I don't want to keep this player, then you can let them go. And there's usually very little, if any, cap hit for that at all. You usually don't really have to pay them very much of anything. It's a way to lock up players that are not doing anything for you right now, but could be doing something for you in the future, basically. Every team gives out futures contracts at the end of the season. They usually give out, in my experience, anywhere from like 10 to 15. We gave out 12, so let's take a look at some of these names. We have Miles Adams, defensive tackle, Matt Cole, wide receiver, Aaron Donkor, linebacker, tackle, Greg Eiland, Aaron Fuller, wide receiver, Gerard Hewitt, defensive tackle, Mike Jackson, cornerback, Cade Johnson, wide receiver, Pierre-Olivier Lestage, guard, although I personally think he's more of a center, Cody Thompson, wide receiver, Lakiem Williams, linebacker, and Niall Scott, defensive tackle. So these are guys who other teams will not be able to sign from us this offseason, and they kind of have a practice squad spot reserved. And if they really impress in training camp, they could maybe move up a little bit in the world and even get on the active roster. But that's basically the idea behind futures contracts. You give out a little bit of money to make sure you have them secured for next year. So looking at this list of players, some of these guys I don't know anything about. Like Matt Cole, I don't think I've ever seen him. I didn't even know he was on the practice squad at this moment. We haven't really seen anything from Pierre-Olivier Lestage yet. We know that the coaching staff kind of likes him. And Niles Scott, I couldn't tell you anything about him. The rest of the guys we know a little bit about. And I'm definitely excited about bringing back Aaron Fuller. I still feel like there's something there. Obviously, that kind of rings hollow as the years go by and he never gets a shot. It's starting to turn into like a John Ursua situation where you feel like he has some talent, but if he had the talent that you think he has, wouldn't he get out there at some point? But I've always liked Fuller. I kind of like Cade Johnson too. Was sad when we ended up cutting him after picking him up in UDFA. I felt like he could be one of our better UDFA pickups, but nobody's picked him up, so he still has a chance. He's still relatively young. Mike Jackson played a little bit this year and looked honestly really good. Very small sample size, but definitely excited to bring him back. It seems like the coaching staff has isolated him as being somebody that they would like to carry forward in terms of cornerback depth. I don't know if we're going to be retaining a guy like a Gavin Heslop next year, but Mike Jackson looks like he's going to stick around for at least a little bit. Pierre-Olivier Lestage, I don't know if there's anything there, but I know the coaching staff likes him, so that's cool. I'm also low-key kind of optimistic about Greg Eiland. I think he could become an NFL roster-worthy offensive tackle in the NFL. He could kind of be what Curhan was. Eiland has some physical limitations. I scouted him out a little bit last year, but I kind of like him. And Cody Thompson is a guy who usually does something in training camp to turn heads, and it never manifests itself in the regular season, but maybe one of these years. So there are some names here that are going to be cool to have around. Miles Adams played a little bit this regular season, by the way, and I don't want to say he played great or anything, but he didn't look completely out of his element. Did he look worse than Robert Kimdichie? Did he look worse than LJ Collier? I don't know, not really. I know that's not a high compliment, but it means that you belong on an NFL roster in some capacity, right? Aaron Donkor, obviously it's kind of a cool story with him coming from NFL Europe, but I don't know if he actually has a future playing in the NFL, but we'll be keeping tabs on his career going forward. So that's really all I got. That's really all I can say about this video. Obviously, none of these guys have great odds to be part of anything for the Seahawks long term, but these are guys that we have identified as people that we at the very least want to have around going forward. So that's really all I got for this video. I understand that right now the focus is on Carroll, Schneider, Norton, Waldron, Solari, maybe Izzo, maybe I don't know, Aaron Curry. Do people even know that he's a linebacker coach on this team? I don't know. But I understand the focus is on things like that. The focus is on the guys like Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, Chris Carson, although we're not going to find out about those guys for quite some time, I don't think. But futures contracts matter. Sometimes a guy you end up keeping on your team with a futures contract becomes something pretty good. And there's some guys here that I like. There's some guys here that I'm interested to see going forward. And I hope that next season some of these guys get the opportunity to show what they can do and show that they can do something good. So that's I'll leave it at that for now. I'll make another video later. We'll just keep going business as usual, and at some point I'm going to address the what seems like will be a lack of significant moves with the Seahawks this offseason because I read the tea leaves, and the tea leaves tell me that business as usual in 2022. And I've got thoughts about that, and I know you guys do too, but we'll get to that when we come to it later. So let me know what you think down below about these futures contracts. See you guys later. Go Hawks.